I feel like most of you know me in here. Those who don't, on Facebook I use my nickname Shay, but my real name is Shannon. But I answer to both, and I'm Sammy's mom. And I've been a special ed teacher in New York for about 15 years. Part of that was as an early intervention provider, and then also a pre-K and kindergarten special ed teacher, which is what I do now. And obviously I've been advocating for children with disabilities since Sammy was born, which would have been almost 16 years. And I call myself a farmer. I have 2 goats, lots of chickens, a crazy dog, 3 cats, some stepkids, a fiance. So we're busy. And that's Sammy. Sorry this is blurry, but I wanted to put it in because it was great. 9 out of 10 special needs parents prefer a colonoscopy to an IEP meeting. I think that's probably true. It doesn't have to feel like that. I hope it doesn't or hasn't for most of you, but I know people are usually pretty nervous and uncomfortable when they come into the meetings. I was a certified teacher when Sammy had his first transition meeting from pre-K to kindergarten. And I had been working on my master's, and during that time I received my master's in special education. So I hadn't gone to a meeting as a teacher yet, but I had gone as a parent. And I remember there being probably 20 people at that meeting, his pre-K team, and then his school-age team that we had never met before. And I talk a lot, and I'm pretty comfortable talking a lot and asking questions, but what I've found as the teacher is that most people are very uncomfortable talking and asking questions. So I hope today that's really what I hope you take from this, is to just be a little more comfortable in the meeting, because you are the most important part of the team, second to the child. So the school's job is obviously to provide a free, appropriate public education. Federally, they have to follow all of those laws that exist. Your state will have their own ways of doing that, but what it comes down to is they have to follow that. So what that means is they have to, most of our kids, obviously, we know a little bit early, so by the time you get to school, they've already had assessments and evaluations, but those things have to continue. Or, you know, some of you have kids that might not need as much physical therapy or occupational therapy, but if the teacher or someone on the team or yourself feels that they need that, you can, you know, add that. And the school has to, if you request it, you have to have a meeting about it. Sometimes you can skip the meeting, depends on your district, but they have to honor that request. The school sometimes has to identify the disability. Sammy's disability on his IEP was multiple disabilities, but some of you have probably a speech language impairment if you have a higher functioning child. But something has to be, I think there's 12 classifications, and they have to put one of them on the IEP. The school also provides the related services if your child qualifies for speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy, ABA, counseling, whatever your child needs. They have to present to you your child's present level. That's the most important part, in my opinion. I was just telling someone this morning, my fiance's son, one of them has a 504 and one has an IEP, and every time the IEP comes in the mail, it's this thick, the envelope. So he opens it and he reads the first paragraph and he goes, because it's so intimidating. And a lot of it is hard to read and difficult to go through, but it's so important to do that because a person other than you has written it about your child, and you need to make sure that what's in there is appropriate. And goal writing, obviously. also very important, but the goals are based on the present levels that your child is presenting with, and then improving your child's educational results. So your job is to have as much understanding as you can about your free, appropriate public education. A great way to have a better understanding is to just ask questions when you're there. It's okay to go in and not know anything, because that's not your job as the parent. The first few years, just watching the last presentation, I remember he was pretty medically involved. That's a lot of stuff. You're trying to be the doctor managing all the appointments and all of the therapies, and now you have to add the school. So you're an equal partner in all of those, everything that happens at the school, and you have the best knowledge about your child. You're the expert. I'm sure you've heard that from probably your doctors and your school teams now, but you are the expert. So it's very important for you to go, to advocate, and to make sure that your child is represented as best as can be possible. Communicate with the team. I think I've made every single person that's ever worked with Sammy one of my best friends. They might not call me their best friend, but I believe, oh, we're best friends. And the ways I've done that is just initially just not leaving them alone, like email, call, however they tell you to get a hold of them, I do that. And I communicate about everything. And I'll even let them in on some little intimate, like, home things, so they feel a little bit more connected to Sammy. I mean, the children do it themselves. They're very loving children. I mean, yesterday, being in the room for 4 hours, I think every single child was, giving hugs, and it was great. Nobody cried in there yesterday. It was so weird. I expected a lot of crying, but nobody did. But yeah, I think just making sure, you're in constant communication, which means making them really good friends. I write a lot of IEPs every year. I had a good laugh about this. So no, I do not plan to do any work today according to my IEP. I only have to complete work on 3 out of 5 days with 75% accuracy in a variety of settings. Like, what the hell does that mean? But there's a lot of stuff like that on IEPs, and I just have the pleasure of being on both sides. But before I remember being like, what is this? Like, this makes no sense. It does to your staff. They're collecting data on your child. There's books and papers with this information, and what they decided is, when something like this is reached, then your child has mastered the goal, and we move on to the next thing. All right. Oh, look at Sammy, so cute. That was preschool graduation. Okay, parents must be an active member. When Callie was giving her speech the other day, I thought we should have planned this better and just chimed in and bounced ideas off each other, because that was the whole premise of my presentation, was the most important person is you and your child, but a lot of our children cannot communicate. So being an active member looks like a lot of different things. You communicate. I would say the teacher, the special ed teacher, is probably the most important. If your child has a one-on-one aide, that person is as important. I would give my cell phone number to every single one of those people. I mean, Sammy also had a lot of medical stuff going on, so they could just reach me instead of having to find my phone number and, but the teachers and the staff are going to reach out to everyone at some point during the school year, but I made sure to reach out very frequently and talk about, oh, I see him doing this at home. Is he doing this at school? I used a notebook, which is something you can have written into your IEP, and he had a little note that would come home every day. It wasn't a notebook note every day, but it was like, here's what he had for therapy, some things he worked on. Did he poop or not? Because that was so important. Poop was a big thing that we communicated about. We didn't have poop in the IEP, but it was important. So, assist with the goals. Like, obviously, I think you're all familiar with carryover. You've probably had people in your homes, some of you for years. Carrying over the goals is so important. And then just keeping an eye on your child services and supports and making sure, they're happening. I think bigger districts, it's probably not a problem, but if you live in a rural area where services are slim, or a PT, OT, speech therapist is few and far between, you just need to make sure that person is working with your child at some point. And I didn't want to forget, really rural areas, oftentimes instead of direct contact, they'll put in consult on the IEP. I personally totally disagree with that. There's a time it's necessary, but a lot of times they do that because they just don't have an OT or a PT available for, some places they come to the school like one time a month. And so that PT or OT will see all of the kids in one day, but what really happens is they put consult on your IEP, and so they consult with the teacher who then carries over the goals, which I don't know. I think most of our kids probably need to physically see somebody. But again, I've only really seen that in very small places. Follow up and communicate with the teacher about anything and everything you want to, except maybe what we did last night. No. It's just really important to, like, for example, Sammy used to qualify for summer school because he was considered 12-year student, or 12-month student, sorry, because he had multiple disabilities. And children with multiple disabilities on their IEP technically qualify for school 12 months out of the year. So I would send him because I thought it was benefiting him. But what I didn't know is the team was changing. So there was only, I think, like, his speech person was the only person that was familiar to him. And even though he did not communicate with words, he could very much communicate with his hands and throwing toys. So he didn't like his new staff, and what that looked like was he suddenly became combative. And the teacher, I would pick him up and she would say, I think we have to do an FBA. He's like, really bad. Like, he's slapping me. And I was like, oh my God, that's terrible. But I think it turned out that was the last year Sammy went to summer school, because summer school ended. I think we had 2 weeks off. I never said anything to his teacher or his regular staff. School started, and a couple weeks in I said, is he being a little jerk? And she was like, no. And I was like, oh, okay. And what it came down to is he couldn't communicate that he either wasn't comfortable with the staff or he just didn't like them. I don't know. So he never went again because summer school was no longer benefiting him. Instead, he was presenting with these unwanted behaviors. But it's things like that, that are just different, and communicating with whatever staff is working with him is the most important. And then, of course, supporting your child. Lots of crying at IEPs. Lots of crying, period, right? But it's a very emotional time. And I cry at IEP meetings of just my students, because it's a time to sit down, talk as a team, everybody in the same room, about the progress. And I cry the happy tears, from the start of the year to now, how amazing the kids have been, how much they've changed, how much they've progressed. I think most parents are crying because they're terrified. And a lot of what we hear there sounds negative. You know, when the speech therapist reads her quick little blurb about the child's evaluation and how they scored, it just really sounds terrible. And then, you know, after they read it, you try to put it in a fluffy sandwich and say, okay, yeah, it sounded really bad. However, it doesn't mean that they're not making progress. But hearing that all at one time is certainly can be devastating. Okay, things to do to prepare for your child's IEP meeting. You know your child best. Being able to make a list. Some people are really good at remembering everything. If you're not, I would just jot down a couple things, like what your child is really good at, things that are easy, things that are difficult, things that make your child very unique to other kids, and write down some goals that are important to you. If you don't know, that's fine, but you can ask. Like I was chatting with one family this morning and talking about making the transition from like a regular math to a life skills math. And sometimes, you know, the school tends to focus on the academic part, and we're always wanting to increase, you know, those math skills, ELA, reading, and that looks different for everybody. However, that tends to be the focus. But if a parent chimes in and says, you know what, I just don't think we're going to be doing division and multiplication, maybe what we should be doing is making, you know, things that are going to apply to the child's life, like telling time, counting money, measuring things, to cook something, you know, being able to look and kind of figure out, you know, matching the measuring cups, things like that. Share your concerns about your child's interests and dislikes. It's always great for your team to know as much as they can about your child, and it's okay for you to offer suggestions. I think sometimes I still get intimidated because I'm the special ed teacher, and I'm probably the person there with the least amount of education compared to the speech, OT, and PT. So it can be intimidating sometimes. Even it's been 15 years, and they're my good friends, but it's still like, you know, my PT friend is a doctor, and I'm not. I'm just a mom and a teacher. So offering suggestions can be intimidating, but they're definitely heard, and they're valuable, and if you have them, please make them. And even if you think of it later, email the team, call them. It's never too late. The IEP meeting is not the only time that you can talk, so know that you're able to call a meeting anytime. If you do have a lot of times, you know, the first step would be email the teacher or whoever. You know, if it's a speech question, you would talk to them. But if you're just not feeling like you're getting anywhere, you can call the special ed department and request a meeting. And so your child obviously can be involved. I didn't bring Sammy just because it complicated my meeting, but some of your kids are fully capable of participating in those meetings, and they should definitely be there. They always have the right to be there. My biggest thing, besides advocating for your child, is the least restrictive environment. I don't want to run out of time. I'll talk fast. But so there's the least restrictive environment is supposed to be the space that your child has the least restrictions. So that looks different for every child here. Sammy was in a self-contained 12-1-3-1 classroom. So that classroom, you could enter at kindergarten, you would stay in that room until you were 22 years old, and everybody had pretty severe needs in that classroom. So he was in that classroom, but Sammy was a social butterfly, and he liked to play with other kids, and he liked to roam the halls and go to PE, and, you know. So things you can do is request things like, hey, I know he's in the self-contained room, but can he go to recess with this group of kids? And I always pulled him back a couple of years because developmentally he was not, when he was in second grade aged, developmentally he was not second grade. So I would have him go to recess and lunch with like the kindergartners, but then go to special with the kids his age, so that the kids his age were also seeing him. Because it always bothered me too when, back when I was in school, you never saw anybody with a disability. You'd see someone in the hallway like one time and like, who's that? I've never seen that person ever. I didn't want that to be the case for Sammy. So you can make those requests. And the push now is to put everybody in co-integrated classrooms. So I teach a co-integrated pre-K and kindergarten classroom. It is not appropriate for everybody. I have children in those classrooms right now that do not belong there, and it's not because I didn't fight, it's because I have a boss and they told me what to do. So, and the parents were not at the meetings to advocate, and so they've got placed somewhere they shouldn't be. And I say they shouldn't be there because they're just not going to gain very much from being in a room where everybody is typical and, we're still working on the very basic of skills. So the least restrictive environment can look like a lot of different things. And you can request or make suggestions about where and what your child should be participating in. You can ask for things like an adaptive PE. And if your child really likes music, you could ask that they be in, like a smaller classroom where they have more opportunity to participate. You can basically ask for whatever you want. They're not always going to say yes, but I work in a rural district, but it's a very large district, and it's in upstate New York. Even though we're considered like a poor school, they get a ton of free money. So there's a lot of money for all these things, and I just tell people, just ask. The next biggest thing, a lot of our kids obviously benefit from a one-on-one aid. When I fill out the request, the parents don't always request a one-on-one aid. It's shocking to me. Sometimes these kids come to school, they can't talk, they're not potty trained, really minimal skills, especially post-COVID. And I'm like, where have you been? And oh my gosh. And there's no one-on-one aid. And they're in a co-integrated ICT room, which what it should look like is you should walk into a co-integrated classroom and be a little clueless about who has the disability. But that's not the case. So a one-on-one aid, obviously very important. I think for the most part, it's been relatively easy for most 1P36 kids to have an aid. But I do know there are some higher functioning kiddos who the parents have had to really fight. My biggest thing, when I'm sitting at the meeting and requesting an aid and I say, hey, there's a fire drill or an active shooter at the school, how's that kid going to get to safety? How are they going to get there? If there's not somebody assigned to that child, what are we going to do? We got, 24 kids in the classroom, a couple adults, and, Sammy doesn't know, like, oh, that's the fire alarm, like, let's go outside. So, really defining the need, that's always my best example, because then when you say that, they're like, oh, crap. Yeah, that's right. I mean, how are we going to get them out? It might be behavior, it might be inattention. If your child really cannot pay attention and they need someone next to them, like, okay, doing physical prompts and verbal prompts the whole time. If your child escapes a lot, might need an aide. Social skills, the aides, there's a lot. A one-on-one aide does everything for no money. I don't know how we continue to get people to be one-on-one aides. Their job is to be your child's, work family. And they do everything. They change the pull-ups, they feed your child, they do every single thing. And so if your child needs, is not going to be able to stay safe or can't, sit at a circle and attend to a story and things like that, especially if they're placed in a setting where there's a large number of typically developing kids. Defining the responsibility of the aides, it's not your job, that would be the job of the team, but it would be while at the meeting. Those things should be discussed. Maybe not over a period of time. If obviously your kid is older, you don't need to do that, but in the beginning that should definitely be discussed. I remember one of my biggest concerns was Sammy had to ride the school bus in kindergarten. He had never ridden the bus. I don't think he'd probably really ever ridden with anybody except me. And they're like, okay, yeah, no problem. We're gonna put him on the bus. He gets the bus. It'll pick him up. I'm like, oh my God, who's gonna sit with him? Like, he's so special. He needs you to sit with him. And they were like, we have one aide for the whole bus. And I was like, what? But that's how it went. And he was fine. He loved the bus. But, just knowing those things, you don't know until it happens. And the district actually has a form that, teachers have to fill out, why we would request an aide. And pretty much if you call a district and say, hey, I want to know what your criteria is for a one-on-one aide, they should send you that form so that you know. I actually love IEP meetings. But I know they're difficult, and I do feel this way after every meeting. Because it is, in New York, we probably start assessing our kids in March, April, and then the meetings are like May or June. And I always think it's crazy, because how in the world am I supposed to predict where a kid's supposed to be in a year? It's like ridiculous, but that's the way New York goes. I know every state is a little bit different. When I was chatting this morning, one parent was saying they continue the old IEP into the start of the next year, and so the beginning of the next school year, they'll have the meeting for that year, which seems weird to me, which seems better to me, but it's just weird because it's not what I do. But the IEP, it's an ever-evolving beast. And, it's, my favorite part is when I call my boss and say, hey, I need to call a meeting because my child achieved several goals already, and we have to change those goals, to the next. And so, anyway. Okay, so remember, everyone's entitled to free, appropriate public education. Advocate for your child, communicate, be their best friend. I would always buy a nice Christmas present for everybody. And it wasn't cheap because there was always like 10 people in the classroom. I'd be like, oh my God. One teacher's okay, but 10 teachers, that's a lot. But I would make little things. Pinterest is a great place to find those things, just to kind of schmooze my way into their lives. Communicating, most important. Understand your child's PLEPs. That's their present levels of performance on their IEP. That is where their goals come from. So if you read it and you don't agree with something, definitely communicate that, and always ask questions. when something would happen in the meeting and I would say, well, I don't know, I think I would prefer, that this happened. And then I'd say, can I ask that? Is that okay? And they'd either say yes or no. Or they'd say, well, we can modify it to try to fit, what you're asking for. So I think that's it. All right. Come on up, Ken.
Thank you so much.